Welcome to Omni Academy. This is Maria, and today we are starting our 11th lecture on the development of eye. In the last lecture, we studied the sources of development and their derivatives. And in today's lecture, we will be studying the congenital anomalies of eye. So let's start our today's lecture. So let's start with Coloboma iridis. It is also known as iris coloboma. It is a disease in which a keyhole defect is present in the iris. You can see in this diagram that there is a keyhole shaped hole or cleft is present in the iris. This cleft in the iris is caused by the failure of the choroid fissure to close by the seventh week of gestation. So if the choroid fissure is not closed by the seventh week of gestation, this will result in a cleft in the iris or a deficient iris. One thing I would like to mention here that maternal rubella infection before the closure of choroid fissure results in Coloboma iris. So you must remember this that if mother has contracted rubella virus before the closure of choroid fissure, then this will result in Coloboma iris in the newborn. So let's now move to Cyclopia. Cyclopia means single eyeball, which means that only one eyeball is present, either the right one or the left one. Now let's move to Synophthalmia. Synophthalmia means fused eyeball. This happens when the midline structures of the embryo are not formed. If the midline structures are not formed, then the two eyeballs become fused to each other and they will not be separated in the future. This condition is associated with sonic hedgehog protein signaling issues. So if there is any issue in these factors, this will result in synophthalmia. In patients of synophthalmia, you can also see holoprosencephaly and proboscis. Holoprosencephaly and proboscis are also caused by failure in the development of midline cerebral structures. So you can see in this diagram, this is synophthalmia. The two eyeballs are fused with each other because the loss of midline structures prevented the eye fields from separating. This is the reason behind the occurrence of synophthalmia. Such babies also have cranial defects, as I have mentioned in the last slide. What these defects are: number 1, holoprosencephaly, and number 2, proboscis. So now let's move to congenital cataracts. Cataract is cloudiness or opacity of the normal lens. Congenital cataracts are frequently linked to maternal infections like rubella and maternal diabetes. So if the mother is suffering from diabetes or if she has contracted rubella virus infection during pregnancy, then this will result in the development of cataract in the newborn or in the fetus. So now let's move to anophthalmia. Anophthalmia means absence of eyeball. And this happens when there is any insult caused to the fetus before the optic cup is fully formed. So now let's move to anophthalmia. Anophthalmia means absence of eyeball. This happens when any insult to the fetus is caused before the formation of optic vesicle. So if the optic vesicle is not formed, then there will be no formation of eyeball. So now let's move to microphthalmia. Microphthalmia means small eyeball, and this happens when any insult to the embryo is caused before the optic cup is fully formed. So if the optic cup is not fully formed, then the eyeball will not be normal in size. It will be smaller in size. So now let's move to aniridia. Aniridia means absence of iris. You can see in this diagram that the eyeballs have no iris. Iris is actually represented by a blackish circle in the eyeball. And you can see in this diagram that there are no black circles present in the eyeballs of this patient. As we know that iris is controlling the amount of light entering the eyeball to the pupil, and if iris is not present, then the amount of light entering the eye is unable to be controlled. So such patients are unable to see properly in light. So one thing I would like to mention here that the aniridia is caused due to mutation in PAX6 gene. So now let's move to congenital aphakia. Aphakia means absence of lens, and this condition occurs when there is no induction of surface ectoderm. As I mentioned in the second lecture that the optic vesicle when touches the surface ectoderm, it induces differentiation in the overlying surface ectoderm, and that differentiation in the overlying ectoderm results in the formation of lens placode. And lens placode was giving rise to the lens. So if the lens placode is not formed, then the lens will also not be formed. So induction is very important for the formation of lens. So now let's move to congenital ptosis. Ptosis means drooping of eyelid. So now let's move to persistent iridopupillary membrane. This membrane degrades normally, but sometimes it persists and its persistence results in formation of web-like structure, or you can say web-like connective tissue that covers the pupil partially. As it is covering the pupil partially, so the vision in such patients is not impaired. They can see properly in light. So you can see in this diagram the persistence of the iridopupillary membrane results in a web-like connective tissue that is covering the pupil. This one. This is a web-like structure that is covering the pupil. So now let's move to congenital glaucoma. This condition happens when there is abnormal development of the drainage pathway of aqueous humor, and the most common structure that is affected in this disease is the canal of Schlemm. So if the drainage pathway of aqueous humor is not developed properly, then the drainage of aqueous humor is affected. And if the aqueous humor is not drained properly, then the amount of aqueous humor in the eye is increased, and this increase in the amount of aqueous humor will result in an abnormal increase in the intraocular pressure. And we know that the abnormal increase in intraocular pressure is known as glaucoma. So now let's move to detached retina. Detached retina means that the two layers of the retina, the inner and the outer one, are not attached to each other and there is a space present between the two layers. So if the space is present between the two layers, then the signals from the inner layer are unable to be transferred to the brain. So if the signals are not transferred to the brain, then there is loss of vision. So this condition needs to be treated as early as possible. Otherwise, this will result in permanent loss of vision. This detachment of the two layers of retina can occur in two ways. Number one, if there is failure of the intraretinal space to obliterate in the fetus, this will result in detached retina in the fetus. The second condition, if there is any trauma to the eye in the adult, this will result in detachment of the two layers of the retina. So now let's move to the papilledema. Papilledema means edema of papilla. Papilla is also known as optic disc, and this edema is due to abnormal increase in the intraocular pressure. So now let's move to the persistence of distal part of hyaloid artery. So if the distal part of the hyaloid artery persists, This will leave a non-functional cyst or cord in the eye of an adult. So this was today's lecture. In the next lecture, we will be discussing a clinical scenario. So see you in next lecture.